Fox Sports, NFL, and Cowboys analyst, also host of the NFL on Fox podcast. It's David Helman joining us on the line here. And the primary reason is Mr. Helman is bullish on one Dalton Kincaid, which, a lot of people are hoping is the case. And we hear it all the time, David. People are asking us, well, who do you think is going to be the number one receiver? Who do you think is going to be the number one receiver? And we tell them, you're looking at the wrong position. It's going to be a tight end. It's going to be Dalton Kincaid, who's your number one receiver in this offense going forward. You seem to share that line of logic.
I do. Yeah, it's good to be on with y'all. It's funny. The offseason in the NFL is so long. It gives you time to sort of marinate with things. And I think from a national perspective, obviously it's a huge talking point when a team like the Bills trades away Stephon Diggs, and the knee-jerk reaction is, oh my God, Gabe Davis is already gone. Now it's Stephon Diggs. Where are they replacing all this production? But here we are in the summer, and I have this, you can call it surprising, whatever, but I just have this high degree of optimism in what the Bills have done here, which is, yeah, there's clearly not one proven playmaker that's going to make up for those guys leaving. But on the aggregate, I feel so good about the options that they have. And yeah, you're right. I don't think people are talking about the right position. I think Dalton Kincaid makes a hell of a lot of sense. A guy that already caught 70 passes as a rookie. Obviously, I think you're going to see his target share go up. You've already seen that he has playmaking potential. He can be your volume guy. And he didn't make it into my story because I only had a couple of options, but I really think the league in general is very asleep on James Cook too. Like the quietest 1,500-yard all-purpose season that you can remember, and that was even with some growing pains. Like, I don't think I need to remind Bills fans that James Cook had some yucky drops and some plays that he'd probably like to have back. And still had a 1,500-yard Pro Bowl season. So with those two guys there, I just feel really good that they can take up the bulk of your work. And if two or three of these receivers can kind of fill in the gaps, I think the Bills will be just fine. But yeah, I think Dalton Kincaid is the most obvious beneficiary because I think he was fourth in targets last year for the Bills. I'm so comfortable saying he's going to lead the team this year. I think, I see this as, if he's healthy, a 100 plus catch type of year for Dalton Kincaid as he sort of takes the lead with this skill group. But y'all, please tell me if you think I'm off base.
No, I think we're on board with you. We don't know what the rest of it's going to look like. Certainly, Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, Curtis Samuel. One of the things that we've noticed about the Bills front office is that they have brought people in with really high catch ratios. Gabe Davis is gone. He had it was a
52%.
coin flip. It was 52% whether Gabe Davis was going to catch the ball you threw to him. All these other guys, and Khalil Shakir, the slot receiver, had the highest catch rate in the league last year at 87.5%. So it seems to be one of those things where if you're going to have a quarterback like Josh Allen, and every so often he goes off script, you need guys that can think like him and get open. But I think the question I'm getting at is the one you first started out. Long off season. How much did the Bills really need to rinse through and change to take another step?
I think that's a great point, and I think the Bills are going through the growing pains that every team that pays a quarterback has to deal with. And I guess I can't say I admire it yet because we have to see how well it works. But I think it's very forward thinking on Brandon Beane's part to kind of get ahead of it, right? When you pay a quarterback, you're going to have to make these types of decisions. I mean, as soon as Josh Allen got his contract, you can kind of sit there and say, okay, like some of these guys are going to start leaving. Like we're not going to be able to pay everybody. We're going to have to replace these guys with young draft picks. And, the Bills, they could have restructured some contracts and clung desperately to the build that they had, i.e. Josh and Diggs and everything else kind of working around it. But we've seen the last couple of years that hasn't gotten them nearly as close as you would expect. So like I said, I think knowing that the tough decisions were coming anyway, I admire them for kind of getting out in front of it. And maybe we'll have to see. Maybe they take a quote unquote step back this year, but man, you got an MVP caliber quarterback. I know he hasn't won one yet, but Josh should be on anybody's short list. So I mean, if there's anybody in football who can make it work with a supposedly lesser cast, I trust Josh to do it. And like I said, I think if you've got two guys you can count on, and I think Kincaid and Cook fit the bill, then like we were just talking about, you kind of fill in around them. Like, is Khalil Shakir or Curtis Samuel going to be a superstar? Probably not. But if those are useful players who you can count on to step up when they need to, and let Kincaid and Cook sort of carry the load most of the time, I think this offense can be perfectly fine. And it sets up well for the future, where even if there's some growing pains, even if things don't look great right away, you now suddenly have a young supporting cast. Like, and instead of saying, how many more years do we have with Josh and Diggs? Now it's like, okay, well, Dalton Kincaid he's only halfway through his rookie deal. James Cook is on a rookie deal. Keon Coleman, we'll see what he can do. If he has a nice rookie year, you feel good about that. And you can continue to add in the draft into next year. I know I'm getting ahead of myself because we haven't even started this season. But I do think the Bills are in a good overall spot where they're going to be competitive this year, and they've shed some of that older, expensive salary on their team, where if they do their jobs right here these next 1 to 2 years, they could build another juggernaut before we know it. So yeah. I like the big picture a lot, and I think people are kind of sleeping on what the Bills might be capable of this year as well.
Yeah, and we do have to roll into that the fact that they're going to have to redo Josh's contract next year, because they did a cap conversion this year to try to make everything work, combined with the money they ate on Diggs' deal. I mean, his cap figure is like $64 million next year. They're gonna fix that, and maybe he gets his next big contract as soon as next year. But we'll have to see how all those things shake out. Which kind of brings me to a team that I know you spend a lot of time on, which has a quarterback contract to deal with and a wide receiver contract to deal with in Dallas. I know Jerry Jones is, playing in the media as he usually does. He prompted an LOL tweet from his star receiver. How does all of this shake out? Is Trey Lance a factor at all in the future for the Cowboys? I'm mystified by Jones' lack of activity when he has a history of paying his frontline players sooner rather than later, and we're getting to the bewitching hour here on Prescott and Lamb.
I've covered the Cowboys for a decade at this point, and I mean, for starters, it's always going to be something. There's always going to be some sort of circus element with Dallas, but this really feels like unprecedented territory. I will say, you're right. Jerry Jones has, I mean, he pays his guys. When he's got an all-pro caliber player, they typically get their contract. But I will point out, the Cowboys love to make it difficult. They drew it out for a year and a half with Dak Prescott before he finally got his deal. It was 5 years ago that they did these training camp shenanigans with Ezekiel Elliott in 2019. Zeke missed all of training camp and reported to the facility to sign his extension within 10 days of the start of the regular season. So there's precedent here that they could push this Lamb thing for another couple of weeks, as ill-advised as I think that would be.
They did the same thing with Emmitt Smith as well back in the day.
They did, yeah. They very famously had to lose a couple games in, I believe it was 1994.
Yeah, the second of which was a rematch of Super Bowl 27. We beat him in Dallas.
Gee, why do you remember
and
that?
they signed him right after the Bills beat him. Yeah, so Ezekiel did the same thing.
Yeah, as soon as they started losing regular season games, they were like, "All right, Emmett, we'll give you what you want." Well, yeah, there is precedent here, but what makes it very intriguing is Dak Prescott's leverage puts this outside the regular scope. Like Dak Prescott, he has a no trade clause and a no tag clause on his deal. He's obviously already been paid at the top of the market, so there's less incentive to just take a deal because you want the money. Dak Prescott could push this thing, and I truly think if he doesn't have a deal here in the next 10 days, I think he's going to hit free agency in March, because it's just very, rare that an all-pro caliber quarterback gets to the open market, and why would you hand over that leverage if you don't have to? What's interesting is the effect that that could have on CeeDee Lamb. Now, the report is, they're still a little bit apart in terms of guarantees, in terms of the length of the contract, but maybe CeeDee also has his eye on this quarterback situation and says, who's going to be throwing me the ball in 2025, guys? Like, how do I feel about the future that I'm signing up for? So there are a lot of moving parts here. If I had to guess, because this is the track record, I think CeeDee is going to sign his deal. Like I said, it might take until the week of the season, but typically the Cowboys find a way to get these things done. They just like to make it as dramatic as possible. As far as the Trey Lance thing, I'm rooting for the guy, and I do think he showed improvement from the first preseason game to the next, but based on what we've seen, Trey Lance looks like what we know he is, which is a quarterback that just hasn't played a lot of NFL football. And from what I've seen to this point, I don't know how the Cowboys could be thinking of him as a viable option to be their starter. Like, in a perfect world, that would be the case. And, if Trey Lance had come out this preseason and lit the world on fire and looked like CJ Stroud or Jordan Love, then maybe the Cowboys would have some leverage and they'd say, hey, maybe we can do something with this. But that just hasn't been the case. And I think it just gives that much more leverage to Dak that if they don't sign him, there's really not much in the way of a backup plan.
Would it give us an idea about, the Tua Tagovailoa, the headlines and his not only words about Flores, his former head coach, but also his new contract, the one he seems to be clamoring for.
Well, he's got it.
The one that he got.
I mean, the stuff with Brian Flores is incredibly interesting, and it's leading to, you're seeing it on social media. There's very interesting conversations happening about the old school way of coaching and the tough love and whether that's necessary at this point. I mean, at this point, it really feels like we're watching the culture of football change. And it's cool to hear Tua talk about what positive reinforcement and belief from Mike McDaniel did for him. I think his contract is fascinating to me because I'll just say it. Like, I have concerns about Tua as a franchise quarterback about, clearly there have been issues with durability. The Dolphins have had issues with health and with playing their best football down the stretch of the last couple of seasons. This is a deal that I would say I would be reluctant to sign, but at the same time, that's the paradox is what's the alternative? And are you willing to potentially go into the wilderness at quarterback? Like, it's easy for me to say that I'm not sure Tua is good enough to sign a $200 million extension, but what is the alternative? What do the Dolphins do if they don't pay Tua? And if you were to go back to the well and draft a quarterback, what are the odds he's going to be better than Tua, who, for whatever his flaws are, he is good enough to lead the league in passing? Like, he's clearly a good quarterback. So what are the odds that you draft a guy who is better than that? And what are the odds that he's ready to play at a high level while Tyreek Hill is still in his prime and ready to be the face of a playoff team, potentially the best receiver in football, the type of receiver that could help you make a playoff run? So I can't say I love the deal, but I also don't really feel like the Dolphins had much of an alternative. And that is why quarterbacks have such a lucrative market right now. It's a very interesting discussion. I feel like the bubble is going to burst eventually and teams will start to balk at these prices, but it hasn't happened yet. And I can't really say I blame them either because the alternative is very, very scary.
Quickly, before we let you go here, David, we were in Pittsburgh last week, and we saw the abomination of quarterback play that was the Steelers. Russell Wilson didn't get anything done. Justin Fields can't get past his first read before he's off and running. Kyle Allen is their third-string quarterback. He didn't even play last week, but he looked pretty good the week before. Granted, it was against third-stringers. What is Mike Tomlin going to do here? I think he thought he had a better situation. I'm not convinced that he does.
I'm really fascinated to see what Mike Tomlin does this weekend. I already forgot who the Steelers are playing in their preseason finale. I believe it's they're playing the Lions. you know, we've all been around the game for a long time. Like the last preseason game is typically an audition for the guys on the fringe of the roster. Like the guys that you know are going to play a role for you in week 1 are typically not playing in the final preseason game.
Yeah.
But do you not want to see a little bit more from Fields and Wilson? Like you just want to make this decision based on what we've seen so far, which is not a lot. So I don't know what he's going to do, but I wouldn't be surprised if Mike Tomlin wants to see more from his quarterbacks in this last game, because I don't feel good about making this choice. I said recently, I'm not trying to convince anybody that Justin Fields is a good quarterback, but I do think Justin Fields' athleticism gives you an element to kind of fake it till you make it. And I think that's what the Steelers might have to do. I mean, their offensive line, they're going to be starting a lot of young players this year. I wouldn't be surprised if their quarterback has to do a lot of things out of structure and outside the pocket. So I'm not telling you I feel good about it, but I do think that speaks to Justin Fields' skill set at this point in his career. So not a good choice at all, but I would probably roll with Fields based on what we've seen so far.
It's kind of like a lesser of the two evils kind of deal.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not a good choice, but that's where they are.
David, appreciate the time. We'll catch up with you down the line. Enjoy the season, man.
Anytime. Y'all as well. Appreciate it.